So yeah, I think we could do Q&A, and maybe we can just keep the video playing, so you can see the music video while we do Q&A. So I'll just call on folks if anyone has any questions.
You started out saying that, you know, you sort of like try and stay away from the Hollywood system, but now it seems like you're sort of like coming back to them or asking them for, you know, I don't know, it might be a big ask, it might not be a, you know, we should work with that. But do you think that this could exist in and of itself as the media landscape? Because we were in advertising, we see the media landscape changing rapidly.
Yeah.
Do you think this could exist in its own media space?
Yeah, so I can repeat the question. The question was about sort of like, it seemed like in the beginning I was talking about what happens outside of Hollywood, and now it seems like I'm going back to Hollywood. And you know, is there a possibility of actually existing sustainably outside of Hollywood with this kind of content? And I think about this, of course, every single day. And I think actually, you know, if I'm going to be really honest, as this is the theme today, I don't think the media landscape is compatible with independent distribution right now. There's a chapter in my book about distribution, and I've interviewed other people who've tried to create their own indie networks online, and they almost always, you know, shut down after 2-3 years. The reality is, if you want someone to come to your site consistently and actually get an audience, all of the distributors that do that spend billions of dollars a year making sure they have enough content to please the range of audiences necessary to get that kind of eyeballs consistently, right? This is why Netflix, you know, gets billions and billions of dollars in licensing, right? Just to get stuff on there and make sure there's always something fresh. There's simply no way for an independent platform to have even close to the resources to build a library to become a destination. So I don't think this can exist wholly on its own. And that is why I'm going to Hollywood, because that's where the funding is. You know, like television in the US is still a $70 billion market. The indie market is a hair of a fraction of that, you know. But I do think there's ways to think about partnerships with existing distributors that also build capacity and value within the communities outside of Hollywood, such that if it happens that Hollywood loses interest in diverse stories, which has happened before, that we have something to go on so that we can go back to community and say, hey, we don't have the big budgets we used to have, but pay us $5 a month, pay us $10 a month, right, to keep it going, because we've built up a bank of work, right, and we have a public platform. So that's why when I envision OTV, I don't view it as just like a funnel to Hollywood only. We'll still show in Chicago, we'll still have our own website, we'll still have content on our website, because I do think it's important to have something outside of Hollywood. But I think a lot of things have to change in terms of regulation for there to be any possibility of indie community-based media actually developing sustainable funding. I mean, net neutrality, potentially regulation that either breaks up media corporations or forces them to actually support emerging diverse creators, which they've been able to sort of skirt around in really interesting ways. I can talk about that too if you want. So yeah, I could go on, but yeah, thanks. Yes?
Do you see any similarities? I'm sorry, that's okay.
Do you see any similarities between the indie community film industry growth, like overall maybe in the U.S. versus like Nollywood and like independent Nigerian films, and just the diversity that we see there? And obviously those budgets a lot of times, especially in the beginning, are nowhere near as big as traditional Hollywood budgets, but going from this independent indie filmmaker status to creating a community that buys the art that we create.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about indie production globally. I feel like the global productions that we hear about here tend to be the bigger budget ones, or the ones that sort of have traveled more. But I think in any sort of like regional economy, what I think is pretty consistent is that you see a range of stories, right? Like, if you think about Hollywood film and you go to a theater in the summer, it's like 2/3 superhero blockbusters, right? And those blockbusters have the same narrative structure, you know, 3-act structure, 3rd act is the big fight scene, wrap it up, you know, tease for the next film. And I think what you see globally is like a broader range of narrative structures that actually make it to the mainstream in terms of different genres, musicals, parody, stuff with sort of queer storylines, family dramas. There's something that's happened in Hollywood specifically where the amount of stories that get significant funding seem to be getting more and more similar. You have your like Oscar bait studio films, which that's where the sort of range is, and then you have like franchise IP, superhero, fantasy, sci-fi stuff, right? And I think overseas and certainly across the US, like in local markets, people are just engaging with a range of genres, a range of identities, story structures, family kinds of narratives. There's just people, humanity is diverse, right? So you're just always going to see more if you lower the barriers to production and actually allow people to tell their stories. The reason why Nollywood is so good is that they do just shoot on whatever budget they have, right? So like, you get like these kind of out of the box, really fascinating stories. Hi.
Okay, so you've covered a lot of ground here, and over the last 10 years. Hi, thank you. That was really wonderful. Over the last 10 years, there's been such a sea change in distribution and production. So you mentioned Netflix, Amazon, YouTube, Google, Apple. Everybody is now competing with the networks and competing with the studios. People binge watch, so watching television has become more like reading a book or reading short stories, so that's changed. The cost of production has gone way down, making all of this possible. Where do you see this going in the next 5 years in terms of what you're doing?
Yes, well, we're in an interesting space where I don't know if we know what's gonna happen, in part because media conglomeration continues, right? So AT&T just bought Time Warner, which is interesting because they, of course, are a cable provider, but also now have like HBO, which is peculiar. They went into a lot of debt to buy Time Warner because I think they feel like they have to have a premium distributor to be successful in this marketplace. Disney is now creating their own platform. They also own two-thirds of Hulu. They might own all of Hulu. They might have like the biggest family streaming platform and one of like the Emmy-nominated biggest adult streaming platforms. Amazon sort of views TV as kind of a customer retention tool. It's like they don't want you to cancel Amazon Prime because they want you to have all their other Amazon services. So they'll give you a couple TV shows as well. So it seems like having your own branded channel is going to be a key to success in the future. I think these players view the cable system as slowly withering away. There's still tens of millions of people who have cable here in the US, but that could change. And if that system changes, I think there's the potential that we could actually have a lot less TV because there's a lot of distributors that are supported by the cable system through what are called retransmission fees, which comes from the early 90s legislation, which basically gives them a cut of the subscriptions that we pay for cable. So you pay $100 for cable, and like this channel will get $10, and this channel will get $50 a month per subscriber. And that allows them to maybe not make as much in advertising because they have this sort of buoy. So without the cable system, I think we'll see fewer distributors, and it could be that this plethora of content that we have, especially coupled with the continued repeal of net neutrality, really could limit the incredible wealth and diversity in the TV bubble that we're in. I mean, FX Research estimated that in 2017, 487 half-hour and hour-long scripted TV shows were released. That's not including reality TV. That's not including short form. That's a lot of TV, and probably unsustainable. That's like in the early 2000s, we were making between 150 and 200 shows a year, right? So it's way increased a lot due to streaming. And I think that overproduction is about the lowering of costs to production, though production hasn't gotten that much cheaper because you still have to pay union workers. Actors are actually more in demand now, so they can ask for more money. But I think that's all about these people trying to build up these brands and these libraries and credibility with customers so that if and when the cable system collapses, we're all going to like subscribe, right, to these individual channels. And we're only going to subscribe to the ones that have been serving us well for years, right? So like it'll be HBO, it'll be Netflix, it'll be Apple, maybe FX, maybe the broadcast networks will be able to hang in there. This is why CBS has an online-only platform. I just got a note that there's new episodes of The Good Fight today, so I'm really excited about that. I love that show. It's a spinoff of The Good Wife. Watch it. set in Chicago. So yeah, I mean, that's where I think the market's going, but like it's anybody's guess. I think if there's a progressive wave and like Democrats take over the House and Senate this year, and then in 2020, we can reinstantiate net neutrality. We're sort of generally at like kind of, we don't really regulate media in the US. We kind of don't view it as like worthy of regulation. But if there was a rhetoric built up that like we're paying too much for TV and also we don't necessarily have the diversity we need, there could be another system that emerges. I don't know. Yes, I see a question right here. Yeah, right there in the middle. Hi.
So I think it's amazing what you've done. I think in terms of scalability, I'm kind of wondering.
I'm wondering in terms of scalability, you know, thinking about how you stand something like this up in another place. I'm just wondering if kind of your academic and research background is kind of part of the secret sauce that has helped to kind of cultivate this group where you preserve the intellectual property of the artists themselves, where you responsibly engage the community and get them part of that creative process. So I'm kind of wondering, you know, what do you think about that, and how do you preserve those really unique and important aspects of what you've done?
Yeah.
What groups do you need to involve if it's not academia, to really keep that going in other areas?
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, my pitch is basically that everyone in TV wants to be Netflix right now, and Netflix is data backed, but nobody knows how they use the data or what they use the data for. And also it's like, it's just their sample, right? So like, if we want to understand how to make web TV, maybe we might need to create other kinds of samples and actually focus on the research. So I think the research is an asset, and everything I do is research-backed and informed. Maybe one of the reasons why we've had a little bit more success at developing indie TV than other indie TV platforms is that I interviewed all those other indie platforms before I started my own and saw like what they did well, which like giving artists their intellectual property and having non-exclusive distribution was something that every indie TV network that I interviewed did, and I thought that was actually the right thing to do for scalability in the indie space. But also like the community aspect was from case studies. So my book opens with this show called The Outs. Well, it opens with a show called Whatever This Is, which was the second show from a guy named Adam Goldman, who did a show called The Outs, which is about sort of basically single gay men in Brooklyn. Very beautiful show, well acted, well directed. And he, for that show, would like host a screening in a Brooklyn bar for every single episode. And like I went to one for like episode 3 or 4, and there were like 200-300 people there, you know, for like a 12-minute episode, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, what is this? And then, you know, it dawned on me that like if you were a gay man in Brooklyn, like you might want to meet someone outside of like Grindr, Scruff, or like, you know, cheesy bars in Hell's Kitchen, right? Like, this is like a sort of, it was like a little bit earlier in the day, you're a little bit more awake, and you're like, you get to talk about this show, right? So like Adam especially was like super key for me thinking like, you have to have community involved, right? To get, and like that show did so well, like there was so much online traction because people like expected those episodes and then they shared them right after they saw them, right? So there's a way in which like, I think we can take from the best practices if we have a research-based process and we're looking at a range of case studies across sites, and we can sort of use that to inform other shows and sort of build models. So I think it's important. I think that will be the centerpiece of every pitch. Like, I don't want to quit my job. I love academia. I like having summers off. I only go to the office 2 days a week. Like, I'm not leaving my job. So like, this will be research-backed or it will not exist. One more question. Sorry, I had not been repeating the questions. Yeah, that hand back there was up before, yeah, I think.
I guess the question is like, as our, like the way that we consume and the volume of media that we consume like daily has increased, have you yourself seen like I guess a change in the amount of stories that people are like wanting to consume, I guess, in styles and such?
Yeah, I think that there are. So the question was, I haven't been repeating them, are we seeing a change in the kind of range and style of TV that people are consuming? I think yes. I mean, I don't want to overstate it because like people still like, you know, fairly conventional shows, you know, like The Voice or like America's Got Talent or Dancing with the Stars. Like those, Law and Order still gets ratings right. You know, CBS is still in business, so the conventions remain. I shouldn't shade CBS. I love their shows. So yeah, no. But I also think on the margins, because there's so much TV and like because TV is now almost competing with film for people's time, you're seeing like more experimental shows, right? And like shows that are sort of strange or unconventional. This has been happening for a while. Like, I mean, I'm sure folks here know about like Robot Chicken or Rick and Morty, right? Like that Comedy Central, Cartoon Network sort of experimental block has been around for a while. But like for me, I'm telling everyone to watch this show on HBO, Random Acts of Flyness. It's about the range and diversity of the Black experience, and it's like, you watch that show and you're like, is this television? Like, it feels like capitalist deprogramming. I mean, it just like totally puts your mind in another space. It's like non-narrative, it's surreal, it's like combination YouTube videos and like really well-shot short films mixed together with this overarching kind of queer, polyamorous narrative love story in Brooklyn. You're just like, I'm blown away by it, right? And the fact that that show now has a second season, and we have, we have Insecure, we have Killing Eve, like there's so many shows that are really pushing the boundaries that I think that the possibilities are endless in this particular moment, and I think audiences are ready for it. Like, I think every year brings another show that a development executive 10, 20 years ago would say would never be a hit, right? And all of a sudden is like out of the water the show that people are talking about. Like, Empire is a case study in this where, I mean, that show, say what you will about the narrative construction in that show, but it was like it was the first like all Black broadcast TV drama. And for years, the industry lore was Black people, America would never take a drama that's a minority cast. Think about the primetime dramas before Empire. They're almost all like led by white people. And that show came on, and all of a sudden, not only did it premiere big, but then the ratings grew. And then the TV executives were like, oh, wow. We were not really thinking, actually. So now I think the gates are open, and at least for a time, we are going to see people watching a range of different kinds of shows. So I'm just here to push.